All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Ignite. So we've got Get to the Close with Elizabeth Kozminski today. And who better to help us learn how to get to the close than someone who has completed over 1,500 transactions. I'm going to say that again, 1,500 transactions. That's amazing. So we've got Elizabeth, who is now partnered with our Leverage Center and a part of that. So you have the opportunity to work with Elizabeth, and don't, like the song said, don't let your deals go down in flames. So use her, and here she is. And take it away, Liz, and help us get to that close. You're muted.
Yep. Thank you, Eddie, for that introduction. Let's see here. Can everyone see my screen sharing? Does it look good? All right. So we are going to go through getting to the close today. We're going to start by talking about timelines, like the timelines in a transaction. We're going to go over some of the best practices and risk avoidance. So things you can do to make sure that you get to the close. Part of every good transaction, obviously, is getting the reviews and referrals. Then we want to make sure that we follow up. And then we're also going to, obviously go through what you guys have learned. So, and hopefully you'll have at least taken something away that will help you in the future. So here's a quote from Gary Keller: "Real estate transactions aren't particularly trouble-free. It's a strenuous and trying time that requires all the attention and effort you can command." So we wish that every deal was smooth. Once you negotiated it, that's it, you're done, you get your check. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And so there's more work that we need to make sure that we're taking care of in order to get to the close. So as I mentioned, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start off with timelines. So as a real estate agent, it is very important to keep track of the deadlines in the contract. So I'm going to go over, here's most of the deadlines that you will find in our contract and the contracts in the area. And for the most part, how they fit together. So each of these is a point of the or a task that must be managed with care to ensure that you get to that successful closing. So we're going to go through each of these one by one. I'm going to show you where to find them in our contract. And then also we're going to kind of talk about what issues may arise. So for those of you who have a few deals under your belt, who've maybe run into some issues, please start thinking about those issues that you've had, either how you resolved them, or if you were unable to resolve them, maybe, what exactly happened that ultimately led to your deal not closing. I'll ask for your input there so that we can go over those and kind of help each other out, because ultimately that's what this is all about, is kind of putting together a group sourcing all of this so that everyone can learn and avoid a similar situation in the future.
Hey, Elizabeth.
Yes.
Are you able to put the enlarge the slideshow and do the slideshow? Because we see your whole screen, and we're seeing like a small section in the speaker notes. So it's really hard to see the actual slides.
What's being shared?
So
let me try sharing
just that section, and that might help.
Yeah, it should have.
Because we're seeing your whole screen with that just as a small window.
Is this just the?
There you go.
That's it. Okay, I apologize. I must have been sharing the wrong thing. So yeah, this is what it should have been. I apologize. Okay, so the basic timeline, we've got it up here. Contracts accepted, earnest money, loan application, home inspection, appraisal, loan commitment, then the walkthrough, the escrow of the documents, closing, and then possession. And we're going to go through these each one by one. So the first item of the timeline is contract acceptance. And it's important to understand what what the contract date is, what date it's officially accepted, because there are so many other dates that play off of that. And we'll get to that. And so generally what we say is when the last signature or initial is added to the contract, that's the date when you're under contract. And you consider that the contract date. There are, as with many things, there's a couple of caveats here. If the seller went through and missed an initial or missed a signature, for whatever reason, it seems to be on our contract, the seller seems to miss initially in the bottom of page 5, and oftentimes also actually signing on page 6. I don't know why those get overlooked, but they do. So even if those get overlooked, it's an honest mistake. And so you can still consider the property under contract and go off of what was there. Now, one other slight caveat that I've run into is with the MLS, they don't care what other items are being negotiated. So if all you're waiting on is someone to initial a title company change, the MLS considers something under contract when the price has been negotiated. So even if there is a change, but it's not involving the price, the MLS will look at those signature dates as when you went under contract. So just be aware of that. If you have a listing, that you need to get it marked as contingent within 2 days of everyone signing off on the price. Otherwise, they may, if they audit your file, they may fine you for that. And I'm not sure, like I would be happy to ask if anyone has any questions. At this point, however, I'm not sure that there's a whole lot that has gone wrong at this point. So I'm gonna move on next to earnest money. So earnest money, I have it here. You can see in our contract, lines 25 through 31 is where you can find the earnest money information. In ours, it is to be deposited within 4 days of going under contract. So that was what we just talked about, is what's the contract date. So within 4 days, the buyer needs to have their earnest money submitted to the title company or whoever is going to be holding it. Now, this is what's in our contract. It can actually vary from brokerage to brokerage. So I've actually seen some brokerages that in the contract, it says within so many days of contract, or once the inspection contingency has been completed. So if you are a listing agent, just make sure you are reading the other brokerage's contract so you actually understand what is expected of them with their earnest money. Now, this is where I'm going to start asking for you guys to interact and talk with me. Has anyone run into any issues regarding earnest money in their deals?
Hi, Liz. It's Alex.
Hi, Alex.
I went through something recently, actually,
Okay.
where I represented the buyer, and the buyer submitted it at the end of the 4th day, but it didn't show it posted to the title company to the 5th day. It was a newer agent. It was his first deal. We had already gone through the inspections. We were getting ready to negotiate the ROC. And when he noticed that the earnest money was submitted, which he thought was the 5th day, he was threatening to take it back to market. And I got title involved, and they confirmed that it was submitted indeed on the end of the 4th day, but it became something that he was, even though we had gone through the inspection, he was threatening to put it back on the market.
Okay. But you were able to negotiate through that?
Yeah, I showed that my buyer did submit it within that time period, but I had never seen somebody be so quick to put it back on the market because they thought it was submitted on the 5th day versus the 4th day. So for any newer agents.
Yeah. So, so obviously it's in the contract, like has to be 4 days. However, there have been lots of issues with, the earnest money submitted but doesn't show, especially if the buyer decides to write a check and put it in the mail. You know, the mail, especially during COVID, mail was taking like a week or 2 weeks to arrive. So sometimes earnest money wasn't showing up for like, you know, a lot longer than it should have. Let's just say. So,
Hey,
just
I had
be-
a question.
yes,
Sometimes you get a copy and you know there's an inspection due. Just make sure you send a copy of the check at the very least within that 4 days. And it's like, hey, it's on its way. You know, we went to drop it off, but at least that listing agent says he can exhale and it verifies the
Yes.
contract is good. So just let
Yes,
them know
typically-
you're on it.
very much so. Yes. Let them know that it's been done. And then I also tried to confirm with the title company that the earnest money has actually arrived. Just because I think I have had situations where it got lost in the mail and never showed up. So, and then just another reason to make sure that your buyer does this on time, kind of going back to Alex's point, is when the buyer was even a little bit late, the seller started to get anxious. And so even though the earnest money was in, the seller now has a bad taste in their mouth for the buyer. And so when it comes to any other potential concessions, or, you know, we need an extra day at the end, whatever that may be, the seller may be less likely to give that to your buyer. So by keeping everybody happy and sticking to the dates in the contract, you kind of keep everyone in a positive mood, so that you're more likely to, you know, help your client get what they want, because the seller's still, you know, thinking positively of your buyer. The next thing we're going to discuss is inspections. And this is a heavy one. Most of the deals that I have seen fall apart happen because of the inspections. Usually it's because there's something that the buyer doesn't like about the house, or they're asking too much and the seller's not willing to negotiate. However, just be aware that if you do not abide by the dates that you put in here for the inspection, then the buyer may lose their opportunity to do an inspection or use the inspection as a reason to release the contract. So fill this out, put in the dates. Generally, I see anywhere from 3 to 10 days for a home inspection. Again, the quicker is generally better. Sellers like quicker inspection dates because they know if the deal is going to fall apart due to the inspection, it'll fall apart quickly. They can get it back on the market and they don't lose too much time. But something else to be aware about when it comes to inspection is we're not just talking about the time period of the inspection. There's a lot of other tasks that need to get done around this. So in terms of, like, if you're the buyer's agent, you need to make sure that your buyer has inspectors. If you're going to recommend inspectors, recommend at least 3. And then that they pick one, they pick a date and a time. And then obviously once they pick that date and the time, you need to let the listing agent know so they can confirm with the seller, and then you need to attend the inspection. If you are the listing agent, make sure you find out when the inspection is going to be and then confirm that with the seller. Even if the property is vacant and has been a go and show, you should still let your seller know when anyone is going to be present in their property, because it's theirs, they own it. So even if they say, yeah, they can go whenever they want, still it's a courtesy, you know, let the listing agent know, listing agent, let your sellers know. Other than the general, you know, inspection turned up that the foundation is going to destroy the whole house in 2 years, like the really bad things, or the things that your buyer discovers in the inspection that make them no longer want the house. Has anyone had any issues with the inspection timeline that caused problems with the deal? Okay. So we're not completely moving on. The next time point to be aware of is your inspection response. And according to our contract, within 3 days of completion of the last inspection, so that's not within 3 days of the inspection period, within 3 days of the last inspection, the buyer has to give the response, whether they want to just remove the inspection contingency period, ask for repairs, or if they want a mutual release. In addition to that, our contract also spells out that they have, once the buyer lets the seller know what it is that they want, buyer and seller have 3 days to basically negotiate and come to terms with whatever negotiations are going on. Otherwise, they will go through a mutual release. So you have up to 6 days after the inspection to get the whole thing negotiated. Now, as a reminder, if it's taking longer, if the seller's like, I need quotes before I'll agree to anything, you can always write up an extension for any of the dates in this timeline. Just use a blank addendum, put on there, inspection, negotiation or inspection response, deadline is extended to this date, and you can take care of it there. Does anyone have any experience where something bad happened because you didn't hit these deadlines with the inspection response or the negotiation? Okay. One other thing that I will also mention is, as a buyer's agent, a big part of controlling this is preparing your buyer for the inspection. Let them know, we're going to go into this house. It's not going to be perfect. There's going to be something wrong, just like there's something wrong in whatever house or apartment you're currently living in. It's not perfect. We are not going to ask the sellers to fix things that we saw when we were doing the showing. We're really only going to focus on the safety and health hazards that are in the property. All right. So you're not asking them to, I don't know. I'm not even coming up with anything right now. Just don't. If your buyers get nitpicky, the sellers are more likely to balk and again, just push for the mutual release. So you can always ask the buyer, are you willing to lose the property over this item? And if they say yes, then, that's their decision. They're the buyer. However, coaching them ahead of time that there will be small issues and we're not concerned about that. We're not worried about a missing knob on a kitchen cabinet or something, something small that isn't necessary is not what this inspection is for. All right. Financing. So this is another big one. On our contract, you can notice there's 2 blanks here. So there's actually 2 different dates. The first is for the buyer to basically make their formal loan application. Usually anywhere between 5 to 7 days. Again, if you're trying to push things along and show the seller that you're serious when you're writing this off, a shorter deadline is better. And then the second one is the written commitment or the loan approval, which is usually, farther out, 30 days out or a week before closing, whatever you want to do. And I will say that in my experience, even though it's written in the contract, the commitment date is probably the date that seems to be overlooked the most by both lenders, just by everybody. Because it just almost seems to be like, as long as we get the clear to close before we have to close, as long as we have the commitment for the loan before we have to close, that's all we really care about. Like, we're not going to blow up the deal because we're 2 days late on the commitment when closing is in another 5 days and we'll have it tomorrow. So just be aware of that. And again, though, if you are worried about it, if you have one of those newer agents like Alex was mentioning, you may want to put together an addendum extending this if you need an extra couple days for it, just before it's necessary. So you don't have someone blowing up the deal over it. One other thing is the appraisal is not really spelled out in the contract. So this is a date you need to track, but it's not in the contract. A lot of buyers like to wait until after the inspection before they will pay for the appraisal, because they don't want to pay for an appraisal if they think the deal is going to fall through due to the inspection. However, encourage them to do it sooner rather than later, because appraisal is one of those areas. It's one of the things that can very, very often delay a deal. So the sooner the appraisal can get done, the better. So make sure you're following up with the lender on that appraisal to make sure it's been ordered, make sure it's been scheduled, and then know when it's going to come back and get it done as soon as possible. Anyone have anything that they've run into with financing that would be good advice for the rest of us going forward?
I do on
Yep.
on that commitment. How are you guys today? I
Yep.
recommend where it says financing for the commitment, I actually spell out the actual 30 days. So I don't put a date. I know we have a drop down for dates. If you put 30 days in there, that covers you for the whole 30 days, because you have the negotiation phase or period where people don't go back and change that commitment date. So if you select a specific date and you negotiate for 5 days, you lost 5 days because no one actually went back and added additional 5 days to that commitment. So I think it's important that you actually spell out 30 days, just put it exactly 30 days, and that will help you so far as saving some of those commitment dates.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's a very good point, that for a lot of these, we often, like in the inspection, will say however many days. Yeah, the commitment, even though in .loop, or I'm not sure about DocuSign as much, but even though we may have a date field in there, you can still put in a text instead and say a number of days, which may be more beneficial depending on how quickly you're trying to get this closed.
I had a quick comment.
Yes.
When you get that loan approval, read it and read it 2 more times. Talk to the guy, email him, at least confirm the cash to close, because that's where it blows up. Well, he said, and she's doing, there's a gift letter, but if the loan processor individual is competent, they'll go through that, and it's best to have that conversation now than 18 days later after everybody's upset at you.
Yes, you should definitely be in communication with the lender throughout, building a good relationship with them. This is another reason to encourage your buyers to work with your preferred lender as well, because you know that person's good, and that person will take care of things like making sure they have the funds to close, and confirming everything early on, rather than waiting until the last day and realizing, oh, they were going to transfer stuff from their retirement account, but that takes 3 business days. And so yeah, that's another good reason to have a preferred lender. Okay, walkthrough. We used to have a walkthrough addendum. It's still in .loop. I think it's probably still in DocuSign. You can use it if you would like. However, it's no longer necessary as we put this paragraph into the contract. So walkthroughs are generally probably within 5 days of closing. You get to make sure that all of the repairs from after the inspection are done, make sure that no major damage has been done to the property. But so with the addendum that we used to have, the buyer would sign off on it once they had their inspection. With this language now in the contract, basically what it is saying is, if there's something wrong, It's the buyer and the buyer's agent's responsibility to let the listing agent and the seller know as soon as possible, right away. So if there is no response from the buyer or the buyer's agent after a walkthrough, at least in terms of the language in our contract, that means that the buyer is accepting the property in the condition that it's in at that time. So just make sure that if you walk through it with the buyer and the buyer has some hesitation, you let the listing agent know right away. Even if they have to think about it, they have to decide, still let them know that the buyer is thinking, because if you don't respond, the buyer may miss out on an opportunity to say, no, I don't want to purchase the property until this is done, or that is fixed because it wasn't fixed to my specification, whatever it may be. And so that's the big thing to recognize with our contract is it's the buyers and the buyer agent's responsibility to let someone know if there is an issue with the walkthrough. And again, there's also the walkthrough addenda, and some brokerages are still using that. So again, you just have to be aware when you're the listing agent, what does the particular contract of the co-broke, what does their contract say? Has anyone had any walkthrough issues that they would like to share? Right. I will say I have seen deals where the buyer comes back and says, we wanted something fixed, and it just flat out wasn't fixed, or it wasn't fixed well enough. And they delay closing. They'll delay it for a few days if they need to, for the seller to come to actually do the repairs that they agreed upon. So just be aware that walkthrough is not just a formality. It is something that can actually impact your closing. To date, I cannot think of any deals that have actually fully fallen apart because of the walkthrough, but I definitely have deals that have been delayed due to it. And then finally, actually not finally, but just the next one is closing. So there's again 2 blanks here. The first one you'll see is funds and documents placed in escrow. And then the second one is the closing of escrow and disbursement. So again, there's 2 separate dates here. The second date should always be after the first, or they can be the same date. And this is another one where I've actually seen both title companies and lenders sometimes ignore that first date. So as long as they can get the funds and documents into escrow in time for the closing and disbursement in that second date, that's kind of more what they care about. It used to be pretty much you had to have people sign before 11 a.m. The day of closing in order to be able to file that day. However, since COVID happened and the counties are now, the filing changed due to COVID, what they allow and what they don't allow. I've seen things, people can sign even later than that and still have it file and fund the same day. So pay attention to both of these dates, but just know that the second one is probably a little bit more important than the first. And again, make sure that everything is ready in time for this, that everyone's been scheduled to sign, that if you represent the buyers know that they need to get their funds wired to the title company in time for that. Even before this, making sure that the lenders have the clear to close and that the CD has gone out. For those of you who don't know, closing disclosure has to be acknowledged by the buyers 3 days before they can close. And that is a federal law that came out of the 2008 financial crisis. There are some lenders that will actually send it out, even if they're still waiting on a final condition for the clear to close, just because they don't want to delay closing. However, it is something that has to happen and could ultimately delay closing if it doesn't get out in time. Any questions or stories about these dates?
Something you might keep in mind is the lenders are in that infancy stage, first 6 or 7 days of the application. They request the buyer to do electronic recognition. And if you don't do that, that 3 days could be 7 days real quick. Some people don't have computers and stuff like that, but make sure they sign off on permission to accept electronic signatures.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Thank you. Yes, which theoretically is something that the lender should be worried about. However, you know, in situations like this, the more people who have eyes on something, the better. So the final date in our contract is the possession date. And this is when the buyer will officially get to move into the property. Most of the contracts that I see, possession date is the same day as closing. And however, I know that possession has started to get elongated a little bit with the market that we're in. It's just another tactic to win, have your contract win, as if you're going to give the seller some time back. If it's going to be more than just a couple of days, we do have an additional addendum in the documents that is the seller possession post-closing addendum, I think it's called. I could have a few words off somewhere in there. However, if the seller is going to be residing in the property for more than a couple days after possession, definitely make sure that that gets filled out. In it, you can spell out if the seller is going to pay the buyer any rent, and then also exactly how long that they'll be in there. Another thing to be aware of is that the lender can limit how long the seller can live in that property before the buyer takes possession. I think that it might be especially with FHA, the buyer is expected to move into the property within 60 days. So you can't really do more than 60 days of possession for the seller if the buyer is FHA. Again, I'm not a lender, so double check those numbers with your lender. However, I do know that there are some specifics there that you need to be aware of. And then the other thing is sometimes the buyer also chooses to do a second walkthrough before taking possession back from the seller. If that's something your buyer wants to do, just make sure you put together an addendum for it. So everyone knows that it's going to happen. And if it is an extra prolonged possession, you can also request that the seller basically give a security deposit that they'll then get back once they deliver possession to the buyer, just in case there's any additional damage between closing and possession date. Again, all of this can be changed with simple addendums. If you have any questions on how to word the addendums or what exactly to do in a situation, we've got our Facebook group, the Keller Williams Greater Metropolitan Agent Facebook group that you can always post in, and there will be a dozen people or more happy to tell you about their experiences and what they recommend. And then oftentimes too, Andrew, the broker, will chime in as well. So we do get best practices for all of that. Anything anyone would like to share about possession date and issues that they've come across? Okay. So there's a few other things to just kind of be aware of as you're going through a transaction that aren't actually dated. There's no date in our contract, but still need to be handled in a timely fashion. Point of sale. Point of sale, point of sale, point of sale. The sooner you can get it done, the better. If you are listing a property, have them do it before you list the property. Otherwise, point of sale can hold up a deal. It is probably one of the things I see that ultimately delays closing most. I mean, outside of lending, I guess I should say, point of sale is one of the things that's most likely to delay closing. Especially because if the seller doesn't order it until you go under contract, then the city has to come out and inspect, gives them a list of repairs to make. The seller has to make the repairs, then has to order the re-inspect. And sometimes the inspector does the re-inspection, comes out and says, well, you didn't do this well enough. You need to redo it. Or they say, everything on the list looks good, but now I'm noticing this other item over here. And then it requires another repair and then another re-inspection. The other thing too is just to be aware of what each city's requirements are. Because they're all a little bit different. If the buyer is assuming the violations, which they can do, then some cities require funds to be escrowed with the city. Some cities require funds to be escrowed with the title company. Some cities don't require funds to be escrowed at all. Some of them require you to get the quotes. Some of them will provide their own quotes. So just when there's a point of sale, go to the city's website, look at the building department, see everything it has to say on point of sale. And if you still have questions, call them and talk to them. I have a list of the point of sale cities or the cities, I have a list of what cities require a point of sale inspection. I'm going to drop it into the chat. This is just the ACAR list. So feel free to use this in the future if you're trying to figure out whether or not your city has a point of sale. However, also remember that it gets updated from time to time as some cities get them or some cities take them off. So don't always 100% rely on this list. You may have to still do a little bit of research yourself. Second thing to be aware of that's not really in the contract is the escrow letter. This is going to tell the title company how much you're getting paid, how much the co-broke's getting paid, if there's a referral fee, all of those things. And the sooner, and it has your client's contact information on it too. So anyone who's done deals knows that email that you often get, like right after the title order has been placed, you get this email saying, hey, give me your contact information for your clients. If you get in the habit of sending the escrow letter right away, then the title company gets that contact information right away and they don't have to track you down for it. Which probably I should be on this list, but there's a lot of title things too that aren't really in the contract but need to happen on time. The title company will always send documents to the buyers and seller, or almost all title companies will send documents to buyers and sellers for them to fill out. It's especially important for the sellers because that's where all of their mortgage information goes, so that they give permission to the title company to order the mortgage payoff. If there's an HOA, they'll put in the information there, which the title company needs. And the other thing that the title companies always do is they always check the seller for other potential liens. So if they don't get that document fast enough, they don't have the information they need to confirm whether or not some potential liens may be on the seller. Because if there are liens, they're going to want those paid off with the proceeds from the sale. And it can often take, I think, 2 to 3 weeks for them to get the information back from the state of Ohio as to whether or not the liens are your seller or just someone with the same name. And they have to wait on that before they can close, or they'll have to escrow. I think it's often like 1.5 times whatever the lien amount is from the seller until they get the information. So making sure that the title company gets your client's contact information right away, and then that your clients are filling out the paperwork right away, will also keep the sale moving and won't cause a delay due to the title company, needing this information. Command. In order for you to get paid, both documents and commission information have to put into command. Now, this isn't going to delay the closing. So it could close, the check could be sitting in the Pepper Pike office on Erica's desk, and you're just not going to get paid because you didn't submit everything in command. So make sure that this is another one of those things that is happening in a timely fashion so that you get paid in a timely fashion. Final thing is just making sure that if you have a buyer who's buying a property that's tenant occupied, that you are getting the tenant leases and the tenant info if they are allowing that tenant to stay over. And it's a lot easier to do that when you're under contract and the seller, wants to work with you because I want to close this property, versus a week later when all of a sudden you go, oh, hey, I don't know, or the buyer goes, oh, hey, I don't know how to contact the tenant, if I need to talk to them. And the seller's like, well, I closed, it's not my problem anymore. So just make sure you're also getting that early. A lot of buyers also want to review the lease that is currently in place. And again, if you want to make this stipulations of the contract, just put it together in an addendum, and then follow up to make sure that it actually gets done. So the next thing to talk about is who all is involved in a transaction. So again, you're not the only one that's handling this. There are many, many, many people that are involved. And it's not just you, not just the co-broke, and not just your client. There's a lot of other people. So this probably isn't even a complete list, but here's a list. So obviously the co-broke, the title agent or the escrow agent, whatever inspectors there may be. There's the lender, if there is the lender, if it's not a cash deal, appraiser, the insurance agents, because the lender will require the buyer to have insurance, property managers and tenants, if it's a tenant situation, movers, either for the buyers or the sellers, any contractors, if there was repairs that were requested, and then whether we like it or not, family members are often involved in the transaction. So just be aware that all of these people are involved, and any one of them could potentially cause an issue at some point in the deal if they're not doing their job, if they say the wrong thing to the client. I mean, family members are probably the biggest ones known for this. They show up for the inspection and make comments about how, the electrical box isn't up to code, even though, they're not actually an electrician. So just be prepared to coach your client through any of the interactions that they have with these people. That the appraiser may come back and tell the sellers that their house isn't worth what they thought it was or what they believe it is. How do you handle that? Well, you say, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, we can accept this appraisal, we can and lower the price, or we can put the property back on the market and we may or may not get a better offer, and we may or may not get a better appraisal. I've seen it happen. I've seen it not happen. Because we could even get an appraiser next time who says it's worth even less. So would you rather take the decrease, or would you rather risk it and maybe get more, maybe get less? So just be aware that every time there's an interaction with your client and anyone, yourself included, that there is an issue that could come up. And it's really hard to anticipate all of those issues. Like one class like this, a series of classes like this probably couldn't even deal with all of the various issues that can come up with the inspectors who pride themselves on killing deals. Yeah, if you have that inspector in your list, do not use that inspector ever again. Like it's not an inspector's job to kill a deal. It's their job to inspect the house. So make sure that everyone on this list, everyone that you're working with, knows their job and is doing their job and not trying to do someone else's job. Okay. So when it comes to interacting with your buyers and the timeline, as you're going through a deal, start thinking about what's the first thing that your buyer needs. Like this is essentially going to be like your to-do list to make sure that you meet all of the deadlines, including like all of the documents that are needed and the people that are, that list of people that we just looked at that are all involved. So an example of several of these to-dos influencing each other and leading up to the deadline is the inspection. I think I mentioned it before, like the buyer's agent sends the list of inspectors to the buyer. Then the buyer chooses their inspector. The buyer's agent or the buyer schedules the inspections and then informs the listing agent. So just be aware that all of those steps need to happen before the actual inspection. And if you have an inspection deadline of just a few days, they need to happen a lot sooner rather than later. So, asking what's the first thing your buyer needs? And what do they need to know and what do they need to do? So is it just information they need to know? Like they need to know not to go buy a new car, lease a new car, or even buy it. They need the funds for closing. Do they know that? Do they know what they need to be actively doing? Then what do you need to know and do? What is your role? What are your steps in this process? And then also knowing what does the rest of the team, so all the other people on that list, like what is it that they need to know and what is it that they need to be doing? So what do they need to know? Does the title company need to know that this is a divorce situation and the couple can't stand each other and can't talk to each other and should never be on an email together the entire time? If so, it's your job to know that and your job to let them know what they need to know. And then just be asking yourself, based on my experience, what I've heard, what should I be doing at every single one of these steps in the transaction to make sure that it is bulletproof and that I'm setting everything up for a successful close? Am I hitting all of our timeline? Am I giving the buyers the information they need when they need it? Because if you give them all the information right up front, it may be a little bit too much for them. If you are telling them now, when we get to closing, the title company will call you, you'll have to bring your photo ID, they'll schedule a time to meet you and a place where you would like. They probably don't remember that if you've told them that, along with you need to schedule an inspection, you need to start your loan, you need to submit your earnest money. So just making sure that just because you told them once, your client, do they need to hear it again? And if so, when do they need to hear it? So just make sure you're doing your best to track all of this in the correct chronological order. And then, if you're putting together a list of all these things, come back and look at it time and again. Look at it every time you go through a deal. Be like, was there something that I could have done that would have made it smoother? Or was there something I did that wasn't needed and just added confusion? So again, talking to your buyers, there's a lot of different points in this transaction where you're going to interact and communicate with them. Make sure that they know the deadlines. They know that they have 4 days to get that earnest money in. Make sure that the title and lender know, like the lender has 30 days to close this loan. Make sure that they know, like we're a week in, you've now got 23 days. Is everything still on track? So make sure that everyone has the information they need. Make sure that your buyer has a list of inspectors. If they're still struggling to find insurance, like make sure that they have their list of insurance agents, that you are communicating with all of those parties involved, and that any amendments or inspection reports don't necessarily need to get sent, but amendments need to get sent obviously to the other side. And then oftentimes they also need to go to the title or the lender. There are a few exceptions to this rule, and unfortunately, sometimes they just have to be learned the hard way. So I'll tell you some of them. You may not remember them, or you may. I realize I'm throwing a lot of information out today, so don't feel bad if you don't remember all of it. Hopefully you at least can, internalize a little bit of it. However, one thing I've discovered is if on the ROC you're asking for a seller concession for a repair or something like that, it is best to just state seller to contribute X amount towards buyer's prepaid points and closing costs, and not say for mold remediation. Because if there's a seller concession, the title and the lender the title company and the lender need to see it. But if it says on there what it's for, and it's something like mold, I have seen a lender come back before and say, no, the lender or the mold needs to be remediated before we'll close. So just being aware that there are a few things that not everybody needs to know. Like mold in the property, you can keep that unless it's going to be remediated. But if the seller is giving a concession for it, then the lender doesn't need to know that, because it can damage the deal. And then just this is another good. The other half of this is just a good list of things to like ask yourself. Other time points that aren't quite big time points. So, are you reminding the buyers not to make big purchases? Are you communicating when they should set up utilities and who the utility providers are? What about holidays that may delay the process? The biggest one that I've seen is Juneteenth, since it is a new federal holiday. A lot of people forget about it. So definitely this year I had at least a couple of deals that were written to close on Juneteenth, and they got pushed back to the next day because it's a federal holiday and the county's closed. So then how are you going to negotiate the inspection report? I definitely know agents that prefer to put it in email form before putting it on the formal ROC, kind of sending it to the listing agent saying, hey, what do you think about this before we make it formal? And then I've also seen other agents that say, I'm not going to respond to it until it's on the ROC form. So you kind of have to figure out what you prefer, but just remember that you have that deadline of 3 days to get it to 3 days after the inspection to get it to the listing agent, and then another 3 days to negotiate. And then also just remember to be touching base with the lender, the title company, the co-broke. In this case, we're talking about buyers, so that would be the listing agent, to make sure that everything is going smoothly on their part. And then all of the documents that fly back and forth in a deal. Just make sure that when you've got a do we actually need a document about this, or do we just need to communicate it? Or conversely, are we trying to communicate something that really does need to be spelled out in a document? Sometimes if the sellers say something like, oh yeah, we'll pay to have the grass cut for an extra month, after we move out, something like that, you may still want to get that in writing, because otherwise there's no way to enforce it. And then be aware, who's the document for? Is this the document the lender requested to be completed? If so, make sure it gets to the lender, but title might not need it. Or is it the title paperwork? In that case, make sure it gets back to the title, but the lender is not needed. And then you need to figure out too, what is your preferred method for communicating? Phone conversations are great. They're even better when you follow up with either a text or email spelling out what it is that you said on that conversation, because having that written record is a great idea, just to be on the safe side. So how are you communicating with everybody involved? And then how are you sending the documents that are involved? Are you sending them via email? Are you sending them directly from .loop or DocuSign? And then what is your plan to follow up on documents that you've got your buyer signed it, say we're adding their spouse to title, the buyer signed it, it's been sent over to the seller. What is your system? What is your plan to make sure that you get it back from the listing agent signed, and then it's then going to get sent to the lender and the title company? And then just make sure that you know what templates there are for some of these some of these documents. I don't know if you guys know it, but there's actually a date addendum in our documents. So you can use a blank addendum and you can put in the, the blank space, closing date to be August 12th. That wouldn't make sense because that's Saturday, August 11th. Or you can use the date addendum that will say, you just have to fill in the date, and it actually allows you to do the date of closing, the date of possession. I think there's a couple other dates on there too. Can't recall off the top of my head which ones are on there. However, we have a template. There's a date addendum template. So that will be probably a little bit easier than maybe using just the blank addendum. So on the other side, we have the sellers. So, with the buyer, the buyer's the one that has to do more, so there's a lot more timelines. However, there's still a lot that the seller needs to take care of. So just make sure you're still on top of things, that you're looking for areas in the timeline that you need to clarify, and making sure that all the responsible parties are handling it. Just because the buyer's the one getting the loan doesn't mean that you as a listing agent shouldn't also be following up with the lender. Especially if you haven't heard from the appraiser. Has the appraisal been ordered? I haven't heard from the appraiser. Have they been trying to schedule with me? Do they have the wrong phone number? When you're tracking your timelines, we're tracking what needs to get done. This is when these things are going to come up. So the same questions pretty much that we asked when we're on the buyer side is same thing on the seller side. What do the seller, what do they need? What do they need to know? And what do they need to do? So I'm not going to spend too much more time on this. Again, interaction points, need to be letting them know what their deadlines are. Like the buyer has this amount of time for their inspection. And then after that, we're going to hear from them. And then we have time to negotiate, communicating those deadlines. Communicating it to everybody else. If they need to do repairs, can you give them a list of recommended contractors? Again, give them 3 so that they get to pick. If they need movers, who can they use as movers? If they're going to have someone clean, like cleaners, just making sure that you're providing them whatever information they need in a timely fashion. Even better if you anticipate it. So scheduling all of the communication, making sure that they're scheduled to sign prior to closing, that the title company got everything they needed from the seller, so that payoffs have been ordered, payoffs are in, that there's no liens on the property, that everything is smooth and ready to go. And then again, sometimes even if the buyer's agent says they'll send a document to the title company, sometimes it's still worth sending it yourself just to make sure. And similar with documents, is this something that's just communication, or does it actually need to be put into a document, into an addendum, so that we can make sure that happens? And then who needs that after it's done? All right. This wouldn't be a KW class if I didn't mention command. So a lot of this seems overwhelming. In command, there are the opportunities I'm assuming you're all familiar with, or will be familiar with, since opportunities are where you upload your documents and your commissions. However, there is an option to put in task lists in opportunities, so you can check off all of these things that need to get done as you go through. Ultimately, I do believe most CRMs probably have this, and so use whatever CRM or whatever method works for you. Just know that command is an option and it's free. So I realize I just threw a lot of information. It may feel a little bit jumbled. However, is there anything that has stood out to anyone, any ahas that anyone has had that they would like to share? Feel free to unmute with questions as well.
Hey, Liz.
Yes.
I got a lot out of reviewing the timelines for the contract and everything, when everything's due and all that. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Good morning, Liz. I have a quick question. I took great notes here, but can you go over the documents again and command that have to be submitted to get paid for the deal?
Yes. So I don't have a slide of this. I'm assuming we have a document with it somewhere. However, if you have a listing, there's 4 documents you need when you list a property. You need the exclusive right to sell, the consumer guide, the ABA, that's the one with Venture / Ohio Real Title, and America's Preferred Home Warranty, either signed that they're accepting the warranty or that they're waiving the warranty. Then from the listing on the purchase, you need the contract, the earnest money, the escrow letter, the residential property disclosure, the lead-based paint disclosure. I think that's it for the listing. And then on the buy side, you need basically all of those, but not the listing agreement. So.
Okay, thanks.
And when you go into command and create the opportunity, like there will be spaces for all of those, it'll tell you what is required.
Okay.
And because like you only need the lead-based paint if it was built before 1978. I've actually had a few deals lately where there was no earnest money, so there's nothing to upload. And you know, there are always those weird deals, specifically like if you're selling a mobile home, you know, in a trailer park, that often there's not a title agent, so there's no escrow letter. Like, so there are some weird ones. If you have any questions about what's required for your particular deal, you can always email Erica, and she's really good about responding with what's needed.
Okay. You said Erica. Erica, what's her
Erica.
last name?
Oh gosh, it's either Erica Rue or Erica Carr, and I apologize to her because one's her maiden name and one's her married name, and I can never remember which is which.
Okay.
She's the one who sends you your like the email once you get paid.
Got it.
If you've received anything like that from her, if you've closed any deals, that's who to email with questions.
Got it. Thank you very much.
So the next thing we're going to talk about, oh, and Colleen just dropped her email in the chat, so thank you, Colleen, for that. Best practices for risk avoidance is communicate. I don't know that you can ever really over communicate. Yes, sometimes the lender and the title company start to get annoyed, like, I told you that there's nothing new, like we have no new. However, better to over communicate than under communicate. Make sure you're setting expectations up front, especially with your client. Again, like when it comes to inspections, just let them know, like, these are the things we're looking for. We're not going to be concerned with all these little nitpicky things, like the fact that the carpet's fraying. We're only concerned with the fact that, you know, the furnace may die or there's a hole in the roof, like the big things. And then just maintain your professionalism. A lot of agents get really emotionally involved, which I understand. Like, it's a very emotional time for your clients. Like, this is their home. This is, you know, probably one of the biggest purchases they're ever going to make in their life. And so it is very emotional for them. You just have to be careful not to let your own emotions get involved. It's good to care about them. It's good to be concerned with them and what they're going through. However, make sure that, you know, if they're just piling up, like, that seller's just so dumb, don't add to it and be like, yes, I know they did. Just say, I understand how you feel. We're going to work through it and move on. Don't let someone else's emotions bring you down. Because remember, like, this is your job and getting emotional with the co-broke, like you might have to work with them again. So don't burn any bridges throughout. So as you're going through all of this, if you're putting together like, here's everything that I need to take care of, just be thinking about where is the deal at risk of falling apart. And every deal is different. If the buyer's on financing, like that's where you need to focus your time. If the property's it may be you need to focus on the inspection and making sure that the repairs get done, that the point of sale is done on time, all of those things. And then like be thinking about what are the best practices to keep the deal alive. Again, where do I need to mention to the buyer not to go and buy a new car or take out a loan on anything else, because that'll completely screw up their loan. Or quit a job right before closing. Yeah, tell them not to do that as well. And then remember that you are a fiduciary. So it is your client's best interest, not your own. And then again, live the Keller Williams values. Sorry, I'm gonna try and skip through a lot of this because I know we're kind of getting over. And now we're actually kind of gonna be moving a little bit on to like closing and beyond. Reviews and referrals. So one of the other great things about doing this in such a way that clients feel like their experience with you is effortless and special, is that they're more likely to come back to you the next time they want to buy or sell a house, or they're more likely to refer others, their friends and family to you, and write reviews, which ultimately could help you generate new leads. So we're just going to talk a little bit about how you can turn your transaction and how well you're getting this transaction to close into your business in the future. One of the big things is make sure you let your clients know what problems you solved for them, even if you did it behind the scenes. If there was an issue with the title company or with the lender and you talk to them and get it solved without having to go to the client, let the client know you did that. Because then even if there's something else that happened that wasn't your fault, you'll still look better if you're like, well, I did this for you, even if something else went wrong. And I got to be honest, there's very few deals that don't have anything that goes wrong. There's very few deals that are like smooth sailing, no extra addenda needed. So just keep in mind that keeping your clients updated as to what you're doing for them is key. So in addition though to asking for referrals, make sure you're asking for reviews. Being a strong fiduciary, the local expert of choice, and exhibiting like 5-star customer service will lead to great reviews. And then just pick the place where you would like to focus the reviews and ask them to specifically have it there. So the reviews can be leveraged to help you find more business, and they communicate what it is like to work with you. And so, ultimately that could bring in new leads. So even when you start, maybe just let your client know that at the end of this, you're going to ask them for that 5-star review because they're going to be so amazed with how well you did. And also just remember that this deal isn't a one, like don't look at this deal as this is one deal. Think about it as all of the future business that it could bring when you do such a great job that they want to tell everyone by writing reviews and tell everyone by sending you referrals. So just make sure that you're keeping up with that as well. So ask for the referrals every chance you get when they're happy. If you've called up your seller and you've said, the appraisal came back short, that might not be the time to ask for a referral. But if you're calling them up and saying the referral came back short and I talked the buyer's agent into covering, and talked to the buyer's agent and the buyers into covering the gap. Hey, do you know anyone else who would like to list with me and get top dollar? So be strategic, but ask every chance you get with both buyers and sellers. And then again, at the end of the transaction, especially when you just close and they're so happy because you did such a great job and they got their money or they got their house and they're just so excited, make sure you're asking for the referral. And when you ask for referrals too, don't just ask that they give out your name, ask that they give you the name and contact information of the person that they're going to be referring. Because if someone just hands you a phone number and is like, here's a real estate agent, you should call them, there's a good chance they're not going to call you. But if someone hands you a phone number of someone and says, hey, they want to list their house, I would guarantee you are 10, 100 times more likely to call that person than they are to call you. And then also don't forget after closing to follow up with them. Drip plans, follow-up plans are great for this. Again, use whatever method works best for you. Put it in your CRM, whatever that may be. Command is out there. It's free. You already pay for it. You can do smart plans. They'll automatically, they just bought a property. You can set them up so that they receive an email once a month, every 2 weeks about what do the properties look like in the neighborhood, that kind of thing. And then just making sure that you are consistently following up with them. There's a plan out there called DTD2, and it's called Do the Database 2. And so it's to make sure that you are contacting your entire database twice. I think it was calling. Anyways, they've actually increased it to DTD4. So making it, it'll tell you how often to call and text your database to stay in connection with them, and it bases it on the first letter of their last name. So it'll be like, this week we're calling A and W and we're texting B and F or something like that. I didn't have it. I wasn't able to pull it up quick before this. However, if anyone's interested, I can get that to you later. The other follow-up is the co-broke. If you had a great transaction, you really liked the co-broke, you thought they were good, don't forget that you can potentially recruit them to KW, put them in your downline, and build your profit share that way. So make sure that you are also maintaining good relationship with the agent on the other side of the deal. And even if you're not interested in profit share, if you're not interested in the free money, just remember, like, keep good relationships, because you don't know the next time that you might be dealing with this agent again. I work with some agents who tell me that they definitely get a deal because the agent on the other side said, I wanted to work with you. I know that you're a great agent. I know that you make sure that the transaction happens smoothly and we'll get to the close. So I told my sellers that, they should take your offer because you're such a great agent. So don't burn your bridges with the co-broke. Okay. Sorry, I kind of sped through that last bit. So any follow-up ahas? I would love to hear what anybody's going to change about the way they're handling their transactions, or something that you learned that maybe you didn't know that you'll definitely keep an eye out for in the future.
Hi, I definitely like the idea of adding the 30 days or 30 business days to the financing piece of the contract. I think that's a really great idea. I'll definitely add that.
Yep, that was good. All right.
Liz, this is Armando again.
Mhm.
This entire presentation was an aha for me, and simply because I'm a new agent and I have not done a deal yet. So all throughout this entire presentation, I took very detailed notes. And I just want to thank you for all the information that you presented. This helps me out quite a bit.
Thank you.
I had a quick question
Yes.
on informing your buyer or seller. Do you have like a step-by-step tutorial that you're teaching them? Hey, this is step 1, 2, 3. We'll see you at the close. But something you can send and alert them. This is a process. It's not overwhelming. We take it one at a time, but almost in a cartoon format. It's not so aggressive. This is how we do business. I tried doing that 8 years ago with a YouTube, 8 minutes, and they said it was too long. So a short presentation, why the title company exists versus home inspection versus. You have something that we can send to the buyer or just to prepare them not to go out buy a car.
No, I don't have anything. I mean, so I send out an email to them, like, here's the next steps, things you need to do. And then I send out something that says, here's all the timeline, all the dates we need to meet. However, I don't have just like one big graphic, in part because to put everything into it is a lot. Like, it's really hard to remind them of all of the things that could go wrong in a deal, because I don't want to overwhelm them. And like you said, like an 8-minute video, yeah, that would be like pages and pages of a document. So I'm trying to give them the highlights as they need it. And then if something else comes up, just being like, hey, this happened. Just so you know, there was a lien on that came up on the seller's name, or there was a lien on title, but you don't need to worry about it. Like, it will get cleared at closing. We just wanted to make you aware, like, it's common, like, don't think that this means there's something wrong with the property. But telling them that there could be a lien on title at the very beginning, my concern would be they'd freak out and be like, oh my gosh, is there a lien? Like, what's it gonna do? Like, does it mean I can't buy the property? I feel like you have to kind of judge how much to tell them and when, so that they're well informed, but you're also not overwhelming them. So I don't currently have anything like that. But, and again, I think for each agent, you kind of have to figure out your own system too, like what is important to you and the clients that you work with. Because, agents do tend to have kind of a characteristic clientele, just based on who your family and your sphere is. I mean, I know internet leads are going to be different, but for the your sphere of influence that you work with, they'll be a lot more similar. So you may know exactly what it is that they need to know about and what they might not need to worry about. So putting that together for yourself, I think, would be more valuable than me just being like, here's what I use. I do handle much of this, not quite everything, but much of this as a transaction coordinator with the Leverage Center. So if you're interested, feel free to reach out, and I would be happy to talk with you about how that works. In addition, I mentioned that I didn't have the DTD2 or DTD4 list. However, you want to sign up for my emailing list. I can make that be the very first thing that I send out as soon as I find it. So any other questions before I go? And don't feel like this is a last chance to ask either. Because again, if you think of something later, you're like, oh, I don't know if I quite got that, or I wonder how this would work. Feel free to reach out to me, send me a text, send me an email. I'm happy to answer questions and help.